Welcome back to In Your Money. We're discussing short-term insurance. My guest is Edith Teixeira McKinnon. If you'd like to email, you can send your query to info@anchorcapital.co.za. Before I get to our emails, the point is, when you talked about 1/3 of claims being settled in favour of consumers, let's talk about the 2/3 briefly. Where are claims being brought to your office which you agree with insurers? And then my second question is, once you've gone back and said we agree with insurers, does a policyholder have any further recourse to any other body?
So we can't overturn an insurer's stance if they have on a balance of probabilities established the reason for their stance. So if it's a rejected claim and they bring evidence to the office and they can substantiate with reasons why they rejected a claim, we're not in a position to overturn that. We can apply the law and we can apply fairness and equity, but fairness and equity works both ways. It's not just in favor of the consumer, it's also in favor of the insurer. If a complainant is not happy with the decision made, there is an escalation process to review the decision of an adjudicator, and then there's also the appeal process. So if in the case of us issuing a final ruling that a complainant is not happy about, the complainant can still appeal or apply for leave to appeal that ruling to an independent appeal tribunal of 3 retired judges.
And indeed, do most companies today have their own internal ombuds office? So by the time it gets to you, yes, it's actually been away from a claims department, away for individuals, to someone who will assess it before it gets referred to you.
Absolutely. And most of the complaints that come to us in our division have already been to the insurer to look at, to review, but the complainant's still not happy. By law and in terms of the policyholder protection rules, insurers have to have mechanisms in place to deal with review and escalation as well. And they've developed departments, entire departments that deal with that, and they already apply principles of fairness and equity to a large extent from learnings from our office. We have to, as part of our mandate as well, although it's not our core function, it is our mandate to inform not only consumers but also the industry so that they learn from the complaints that come to our office and the outcomes.
Edith, you get more sophisticated understanding people about having a claim and less sophisticated. So does putting the case to you play a big role in making a decision? So, I mean, I think of someone who may not, who may just have had this claim repudiated, I'm not sure why, and that's it, compared to someone who can justify, can bring lawyers' letters, can provide a lot more information. How does that work in the office?
So we are very mindful of that. The consumer does not have the resources that an insurer does, right? Whole legal teams and all the information at their fingertips and access to experts, etc. We're very mindful of that, and we, at different stages in a complaint, wear 2 hats. If we can see that, first of all, it's a vulnerable consumer or one that doesn't really perhaps grasp the full extent of the reasons for example, insurer has rejected the claim, then on behalf of the insurer, we will ask questions. We will solicit information. So at that stage of the investigation, we almost do it for the consumer, to assist the consumer. But when it comes to the actual decision making, then we put our adjudicator hat on, and we then have to make the decision based on the information that is before us.
It's a lot of work.
It's a lot of work.
So, whereas you get a sophisticated claimant who puts it in, can put his case that much more clearly. Yeah, let's get some emails. Rodney in Pretoria says, has there been a shift in complaints coming into your office this year? You said they have.
Yes, so the trends that we're seeing, where typically motor vehicle insurance complaints constitute about 50% of all the complaints we dealt with. That's dropped, and it's dropped over the last 3 years. So that's sitting at around 40%, and homeowners insurance complaints have increased. We have seen a little bit of an uptick on crime-related complaints, thefts and burglaries and stolen mobile devices. And then commercial complaints are also on the rise to our office. The others sort of more or less the same trends as in the last year.
Jacqueline in Lover says, can an insurer reject a motor vehicle accident claim based on driving under the influence of alcohol without the driver being found criminally guilty of this offence?
Yes. One must remember that insurance is a contract and it's governed by the civil law. The civil law onus of proof, the onus that, or the proof that you've got to bring before us is on a balance of probabilities. Criminal law, the onus of proof is beyond all reasonable doubt. So it's very different onuses of proof. And an insurer doesn't need blood alcohol test results. An insurer doesn't need breathalyzer test results. What an insurer needs to do is bring sufficient evidence before us to indicate that the driver consumed alcohol and that alcohol consumption affected his driving ability. And based on the circumstances of the loss and surrounding the accident, they are in most cases able to establish driving under the influence and reject claims. If they are not able to do that, we can't uphold that rejection reason. But it's all based on the evidence provided to the office.
Yes, it sounds so subjective. I mean, you put a claim in, days later that I've had this claim, there's no proof of anything, and yet the insurance companies are suspecting alcohol.
It's not subjective. They have to bring empirical proof and evidence. So what insurers do is they investigate. They have special investigators that will investigate your whereabouts, how much you consumed alcohol,
where you've been,
and remember, as a policyholder, you have to provide true and complete information, not only when the policy is taken out, but also at claim stage. And if the insurer finds that you have not provided true and complete, that's a different ground on which they can reject. So they don't succeed on driving under the influence. They've got other grounds that they can also rely on.
Okay, so what amount of claims come to your office, complaints about claims rejected for fraud? And what sort of, just an idea, is it a high or low percentage of you helping the consumer in that case?
Again, it depends on...
I'm asking you information that you may not have at your fingertips, but...
No, we do deal with a few fraud cases, not as many as you would think, but we do come across situations where, for example, a policyholder sets his own vehicle alight and then claims for fire damage to vehicle. We have cases where complainants will claim for contents, home contents, items that they've never owned, and unfortunately insurers investigate these complaints very carefully, and if they're able to prove fraud on a balance of probabilities, then we have no option but to uphold that rejection.
Is it high or low?
The
amount of rejections or acceptance?
We have...
And they've done that investigation and provided you with information that they're satisfied that there's fraud in terms of this claim?
It depends, but we have overturned those where we haven't felt that they have brought sufficient evidence to prove their rejection.
Louis in Randburg says, if an insured has taken out a comprehensive motor insurance policy, how can an insurer reject a claim for damage to the insured based on the driver failing to take reasonable steps to prevent the damage or loss? In other words, because of not exercising due care or being reckless. Another one must be so difficult to prove.
It's very difficult. These complaints, do not take a very short time. They require a lot of investigation, and there's a lot of back and forth because insurers often don't have everything on hand, and we have to go back and request information. So they do take a long time. So one again must remember that short-term insurance, non-life insurance, is there to cover you for sudden, unforeseen events. Also there to cover you for your negligence. As a reasonable driver and as a responsible driver and reasonable insured, you know that if you decide to speed, that there is a higher likelihood of you encountering an accident. That kind of foreseeability is what is expected of you. And if you decide to speed excessively and you encounter an accident, and the insurer can establish that the speed at which you were driving was material to how the accident occurred, they will be able to successfully reject your claim. So it's all about the risks that an insurer is prepared to insure and not insure. They're not prepared to insure recklessness, where you have that foreseeability, but they are prepared to insure you for your negligence.
I'm often asked, you've got some insurers who are very involved with telematics, and they've asked that in a different way, not to repudiate a claim. Are claims being repudiated because of their evidence based on telematic information?
Absolutely. That's one of the pieces of data that an insurer will rely on. But remember, they can't extract this data or get it without your consent. So they will always ask the policyholder. Policyholder may not always be aware what is going to be extracted, but that is one of the pieces of data that an insurer will look at in order to determine whether you were excessively speeding.
Yeah, so that we all say this is a different way, this is to assess your driving, but there are problems that could come. Well, short-term insurance can put quite a lot of stress on the unfortunate who have a claim. The Ombudsman Office for short-term insurance will certainly help to investigate on your behalf if you feel that you've been prejudiced. Don't be lazy or shy to ask for help. Edith, thank you for joining me this evening. It's important to note that our program tonight is to provide information and should not be construed as advice. Next week's program will once again focus on financial and retirement planning, and if you need to get hold of me, my details will appear on the screen. I'd like to thank you for watching. Good night.